On a quiet morning in Greenville, South Carolina, two operators closed on a real estate deal, and they never once set foot inside the building. They did not buy the building. They did not buy the land. They did not buy a single brick. What they bought was a piece of paper, a defaulted mortgage. A loan, originally $1.45 million, secured against a half-empty retail strip center, on which the borrower had stopped paying 14 months earlier. They paid $870,000 for the right to be that borrower's lender, to step into the bank's shoes and hold the debt. 18 months later, that $870,000 bet had returned just over $1.5 million, and they still never owned the building. In the next 30 minutes, we are going to open this deal. What a note actually is. Every number, every exit path, every mistake, anatomy of the deal. Here is how this episode is structured. Before any numbers, you have to understand the instrument. Because this deal is not about a property. It is about a piece of paper, and that paper has a name: the note. When someone borrows money to buy real estate, they sign two documents. The first is the promissory note, the borrower's written, legally binding promise to repay a specific sum at a specific interest rate on a specific schedule. The note is the debt itself. The second document is the mortgage, or in some states, a deed of trust. That document ties the debt to the property. It is the lender's right to take and sell the property if the borrower fails to pay. The note is the promise. The mortgage is the leverage that backs the promise. Now, here is the idea that this entire episode rests on. That note, the debt, and the security behind it is itself a piece of property. It can be owned. It can be bought. It can be sold. When you own a performing mortgage note, you are the lender. The borrower's monthly payments come to you. The interest is your income. Banks and lenders sell notes constantly to free up capital, to clear troubled loans off their books, to rebalance. When you buy a note, you are not buying a building. You are buying the position of the lender on that building. And there are two kinds of notes you can buy. A performing note, one where the borrower is current, paying every month as agreed. Buying a performing note is a calm income style investment. You collect the payments. And a non-performing note, one where the borrower has stopped paying or fallen badly behind. The loan is in default. A non-performing note is a problem. But a problem, priced correctly, is exactly what a distressed debt investor is hunting for. The deal in this episode is a non-performing note. The borrower had not made a payment in 14 months. Now, the central question. Why would anyone sell a $1.45 million loan for $870,000? Why give up that much? The seller of this note was a regional bank, and a bank has very specific reasons to sell a defaulted loan at a steep discount. Reason one, a defaulted loan is a burden on a bank in ways that go beyond the missing payments. Regulators require banks to hold extra capital against troubled loans, and a non-performing loan drags on the bank's reported health. Reason two, resolving a defaulted commercial loan is slow, expensive, and uncertain. Foreclosure can take many months, involves lawyers, and the bank may end up owning a half-empty building it has no desire to operate. Banks are in the business of lending money, not running retail strip centers. Reason three, and the most important, certainty and speed. A bank can spend 18 months and significant legal costs chasing a defaulted loan with an uncertain recovery at the end. Or it can sell the note today for cash and be completely done. A guaranteed $870,000 today with zero further cost, zero further risk, and the troubled loan removed from the books is often worth more to a bank than an uncertain $1.2 million 18 months from now. So the bank sells at a discount. That discount is not the bank being foolish. It is the bank buying certainty, and the discount is precisely the distressed debt investor's profit margin. So how does a note buyer decide what a defaulted note is worth? The buyer does not value the loan. The buyer values the collateral, the actual property behind the loan, and then works backward. You ask one question. If everything goes wrong and I end up having to foreclose and take this building, what is the building actually worth? And what would it cost me to get there? That worst case property value minus the cost and time of foreclosure is the floor under the investment. You then buy the note for meaningfully less than that floor. If you buy a note for $870,000 and the building behind it is genuinely worth $1.3 million, even in a bad scenario, you have a wide margin of safety. The collateral protects you. Now the specific deal. 3 things to understand: the note, the borrower, and the building behind it. The notes. Originally a $1.45 million commercial mortgage made by a regional bank about 6 years earlier to finance the purchase of a retail strip center. By the time the fund looked at it, the borrower had not made a payment in 14 months. The unpaid principal balance still stood at about $1.38 million. And on top of that, 14 months of missed payments, default interest, and late fees had piled up to roughly another $210,000. So the total amount the borrower legally owed, what the industry calls the total payoff or the total debt, was approximately $1.59 million. The borrower. A small local investor who had bought the strip center near the top of the market and run into trouble. 2 of his anchor tenants had closed, his rental income had fallen below his mortgage payment, he had drained his reserves trying to hold on, and then simply stopped paying. Here is what matters about him for this deal. He was not a fraud, and he was not hiding. He was an ordinary owner who was underwater and stuck. He still wanted to find a way out that did not end in a foreclosure on his record. A defaulted borrower who is reachable, rational, and motivated to resolve things is a very different situation than one who has vanished. It opens up exit paths that would otherwise be closed. The collateral, the building behind the loan. A suburban retail strip center, about 31,000 square feet of leasable space across 12 storefront units. When the fund analyzed it, the center was about 55% occupied. The borrower's 2 closed anchors had left 2 large dark spaces. But the location was solid, a busy suburban road, decent traffic, a growing trade area. The fund's careful estimate of the building's value was layered, as is, half empty, in its current distressed state, around $1.3 million. Stabilized, with the vacant space leased back up and the center running properly, closer to $2 million. So now lay the deal out. The borrower legally owes $1.59 million. The building behind that debt is worth about $1.3 million as is, and about $2 million stabilized. And the fund bought the note, the entire $1.59 million legal claim, for $870,000. Look at the margin. The fund paid $870,000 for a secured claim backed by a building worth $1.3 million, even in its sorry current state. If everything went wrong, the collateral loan covered the investment with room to spare. That is what buying distressed debt at the right price looks like. The downside is protected before the upside is even considered. Now the money. A note deal has a simpler capital stack than a building deal, but it has one feature that makes it unusual. Let's walk it. Total capital deployed on this deal was about $980,000. $870,000 to buy the note itself, about $40,000 in transaction and legal costs to acquire it and review the file, and about $70,000 set aside as a workout reserve, cash held back to fund the legal and resolution process that was about to begin. Here is the feature that makes a note deal different from a building deal. When you buy a building with a mortgage, the building is the lender's collateral. But when you buy a defaulted note, there is no rental income coming in. The borrower is not paying, so it is hard to put a normal mortgage on the purchase. Most note buyers use either their own equity or a specialized note acquisition line of credit from a lender who understands distressed debt. On this deal, the fund used mostly its own pooled investor equity with a modest acquisition line covering part of the purchase. The structure was kept deliberately light on leverage because the whole point of a distressed deal is that the situation is already uncertain. You do not want a fragile capital stack on top of an uncertain asset. The investor side. This deal sat inside a small, distressed debt fund. 7 limited partners who had committed capital to the fund specifically to buy troubled loans. The fund structure was straightforward, an 8% preferred return to the limited partners. After the pref, a profit split of 70-30 in favor of the LPs, then 50-50 above a stated higher hurdle. The defining feature of distressed debt investing is the timeline. A note resolution can finish in 6 months or drag past 2 years, depending entirely on the borrower, the courts, and the chosen exit path. So the investors went in knowing the outcome was uncertain in both size and timing, which is exactly why the discount on the note had to be large enough to pay them well for that uncertainty. Now, the heart of distressed debt investing. When you buy a defaulted note, you are not buying one outcome. You are buying a menu of exit paths, and the skill is choosing the right one. Path 1. The borrower reinstates the loan. The borrower finds a way to catch up, pays the missed payments, the default interest, and the fees, and the loan goes back to performing. If that happens, the fund, which bought a $1.59 million claim for $870,000, would now hold a performing $1.59 million loan. An enormous gain simply from buying the debt at a discount and having it cured. But a borrower who has not paid in 14 months usually cannot simply reinstate. So path 1 alone was unlikely here. Path 2, the negotiated settlement. This is the path most non-performing note deals actually take. The fund, now the lender, sits down with the borrower and negotiates a resolution. Often, that is a discounted payoff. The borrower, perhaps by selling the property or bringing in a new partner or new financing, pays the fund an agreed sum that is less than the full $1.59 million owed, but comfortably more than the $870,000 the fund paid. Both sides win something real. The borrower escapes a foreclosure and a crushing full debt. The fund books a strong profit quickly without the cost and delay of taking the building. A negotiated settlement is fast, clean, and final. Path 3, foreclosure. If the borrower cannot reinstate and will not settle reasonably, the fund uses the power it bought, the mortgage, and forecloses. The fund takes legal ownership of the strip center itself. Then it becomes a property deal. The fund would own a 31,000 square foot retail center, 55% occupied, worth about $1.3 million as is, against the $870,000 it paid for the note. Foreclosure is the slowest and most expensive path, and it ends with the fund owning and having to operate a building. But because the building's value comfortably exceeds the note purchase price, even this worst case path was still profitable. That is the entire point. A well-bought note wins on every path. Only the size and the speed of the win differ. So the fund did not buy this note hoping for one outcome. It bought a secured claim where path 1 was a windfall, path 2 was a strong, fast profit, and path 3, the worst case, was still a profitable building acquisition. The downside was capped by the collateral. The upside was open. The job from the day of purchase was simply to push the borrower and the situation toward whichever of the 3 paths paid the most. Now the workout. The workout is the active, hands-on process of resolving a defaulted note. And this is where a note investor actually earns the return. Month 1. The fund completed the purchase and formally became the lender. Its attorneys sent the borrower the required legal notices, notifying him that the note had been sold, that the fund now held the debt, and that the default remained. At the same time, the fund did something a distant bank rarely bothers to do. It opened a direct, respectful line of communication with the borrower. The fund's message was simple: We are not the bank. We are the new holder of your loan. We would genuinely prefer to find a resolution that works rather than foreclose. Let us talk. Months 3 through 8. The two-track strategy. This is the most important tactical idea in the whole deal. The fund ran two paths at the same time. On one track, it negotiated genuinely and patiently with the borrower toward a settlement. On the other track, in parallel, it had its attorney formally begin the foreclosure process, filing the action, starting the legal clock. Why run both at once? Because negotiating without a credible foreclosure underway gives the borrower no reason to ever actually close a deal. The advancing foreclosure is what gives the negotiation a deadline and teeth. You negotiate with one hand and you advance the foreclosure with the other, and you take whichever one reaches a good outcome first. Months 9 through 18, the resolution. Here is how it actually played out, and it ended up being a blend of two of the three paths. With the foreclosure clock visibly running, the borrower became serious. He could not reinstate the full loan. He simply did not have the money. But he found a buyer for the strip center, another investor willing to take on the half-empty center and lease it back up. The borrower could not get the full $1.59 million owed, so the fund negotiated a discounted payoff. The fund agreed to release its lien and accept $1.42 million in full satisfaction of the debt, paid at the closing of the borrower's sale of the property to the new investor. Path 2, the negotiated discounted payoff, carried the deal home, and the credible threat of Path 3, the foreclosure, is what made it happen. Now let's walk the numbers. 18 months from the day the fund bought a piece of paper. Walk it carefully. The fund had deployed about $980,000, $870 for the note, $40 in acquisition cost, $70 in a workout reserve. The discounted payoff brought in $1.42 million. Of the $70,000 workout reserve, the legal and resolution process actually consumed about $95,000 all in, the reserve plus a modest amount more. So netted out, about $945,000 of true cost. The note, the acquisition expense, and the real workout spend, against $1.42 million received, a profit of roughly $475,000 on an 18-month hold. Now the waterfall, who got paid what? The fund's capital in this deal came from the 7 limited partners and the sponsors. First, the LPs are returned their invested capital. Then their 8% preferred return, prorated across the 18 months. The remaining profit flows through the promote tiers, 70-30 to the LPs, then 50-50 above the higher hurdle. When it settles, the 7 limited partners collectively earn a return of roughly 1.3 times their money in 18 months. The sponsors earn their co-invest back plus their share of the promote, a strong result for 18 months of disciplined legal and negotiation work. Step back and see what this deal really was. The fund never owned the strip center. It never collected a tenant's rent. It never replaced a roof or leased a vacant unit. It bought a defaulted promise for $870,000 because that promise was backed by a building worth far more. Then it spent 18 months and $95,000 of legal and negotiation work converting that defaulted promise into $1.42 million of cash. Distressed debt investing is real estate investing, but the asset is the loan, the skill is the workout, and the margin of safety is always the building standing behind the paper. No deal is clean. 3 honest mistakes the fund made on this one. Mistake 1. The fund underwrote the resolution to take about 12 months. It took 18. Negotiations stalled. The borrower's first potential buyer fell through, and the legal process moved slower than projected. Every extra month tied up investor capital and lowered the annualized return. The fund now underwrites note workouts to a longer, more pessimistic timeline by default. Mistake 2. During the workout, the fund's attorney discovered a secondary lien on the property, a contractor's claim, that had not been clearly flagged in the original loan file. It was resolvable, but it cost legal time and a small payment to clear, and it complicated the payoff. The fund now commissions a full independent title examination on the collateral before buying any note, never relying solely on the seller's file. Mistake 3. The fund spent the first few months negotiating before it formally started the foreclosure action. During those months, the borrower had no real pressure and made little genuine progress. The deal only accelerated once the foreclosure clock was visibly running. The fund now files the foreclosure action immediately on acquiring a defaulted note and negotiates alongside it from day one. The credible deadline is the leverage. That is the anatomy of a deal where they bought the mortgage, not the building. One defaulted $1.45 million loan on a half-empty strip center. $870,000 paid for a piece of paper backed by something worth far more. 18 months of notices, negotiation, and a running foreclosure clock. A discounted payoff of $1.42 million. 7 investors earning roughly 1.3 times their money. All from a simple truth: that the debt on a building is itself an asset, and a problem bought at the right price is an opportunity. Future episodes of this channel will go deeper. We will do ground up deals, distressed deals, deals that failed, deals in other markets and other asset classes with other capital stacks. But the structure of every episode will be the same. We open the deal, we show you every number, we name every mistake. Anatomy of the deal. If you want to see real numbers on real deals, subscribe. We are just getting started.